In online title Tuesday game, Hans Niemann sacrificed his queen and checkmate his opponent, international master Alexander Gelman, with the pawn. Let's watch. e4, c5. We have Sicilian defense. Niemann plays knight f3. Gelman answers with e6. And Niemann plays an unusual move, b3. Not the most popular move in this position. This is called Westerinian attack in Sicilian defense. a6. It's all theory. Bishop goes to b2 and now occupies diagonal a1, h8. And later on in the game, we'll find out that this particular bishop will actually be the decisive factor in this game. d6, d4 controlling the center, exchange of pawns on d4, knight goes to f6, Niemann develops his knight on d2, and Gelman develops his knight on d7. Niemann starts immediate attack on the black position with the move g4. e5, allowing the white knight to go to a nice square on f5, but immediately it's getting kicked off by the move g6, attacking the knight. The knight retreats to e3. b5, typical move in this position to allow the bishop to develop on the b7 to occupy this nice diagonal. a4, attacking the black pawn, exchange of the pawns. Niemann takes with the rook. I guess he didn't want isolated pawn on a4. He takes it back with the rook, but allows knight c5, a move that attacks the rook. And Niemann plays rook b4, which is difficult to understand why this move was played, because the pawn on e4 was not under attack. He could just went on a1, and you cannot take the pawn on e4 for black, because after exchange of the knights, white plays the queen on d5, attacking the rook and the knight on e4, and white will win a piece. So after a rook went to b4, Gelman plays development move bishop e7, preparing for the castle. Niemann plays g5, attacking the knight. Knight goes to h5, h4 to protect the pawn on g5, which was under attack by the bishop. Knight goes to a nice square on f4. Niemann offers the exchange of the knights on the square g2. The best continuation for black was actually to accept the offer and exchange the knights on g2 and then play a5 was a very good position. Instead, Gelman retreats to e6. Knight goes back to e3, knight goes back to f4, and here Niemann plays rook c4, with the only idea in his mind to sacrifice the rook for the knight on the square c5. Gelman, who was analyzing this game live, saw this, but he didn't think that this sacrifice would be so crucial. So he ignored it and played castle. And of course, Niemann immediately takes advantage of that move and takes the knight on c5, sacrificing the rook. And after pawn takes c5, he takes the pawn on e5 with the bishop, and this bishop becomes an absolute monster on this diagonal with nobody to prevent him from doing damage. Knight goes back to e6, possibly in the future to protect the square on g7 from checkmates. Niemann develops the bishop on c4. Black wants to exchange the bishop, the dark square bishops. Of course, they want to do this because this bishop, as we already know, is a monster in this position. Niemann says no and moves the bishop to f6, attacking the queen. The queen goes to a5. And Niemann starts decisive attack on the king's side with the move h5. He wants to break through those pawns and open the file for the rook, and potentially checkmate on the square h8. Gelman plays bishop f4, attacking the pawn on g5. Niemann goes queen g4. In this position, black exchanges the knight on e3 and then plays knight d4. Discovery attack on the queen. And it looks good. Again, in his analysis of this game, Gelman expected Niemann to go queen h4, which would be logical continuation. But in this case, he prepared queen takes d2, sacrificing the queen, and forking the king and the queen. So he prepared that, not realizing that this would be a losing proposition for him as well. But at least that's what he expected in this position. On queen h4, by the way, the correct move was knight f3 immediately, using the pin, and then winning the queen. But none of this happened, because after knight d4, Niemann sacrifices the queen and plays h takes g6. You cannot take the queen, because there would be a checkmate on h7. Gelman sees it and plays queen a1 check. Now, the only move for white in this position is to block the check with the move queen d1. If they went, let's say, king f2, then queen would just take the rook on h1, and there is no checkmate. So therefore, queen d1, check on c2 with the knight, the queen is pinned, king goes to f2, Gelman quickly takes the queen, expecting the exchange of the queens, and not realizing that the threat of checkmate did not go anywhere, and Niemann takes the pawn on h7 and checkmates his opponent.
It's checkmate?